At my wife's funeral, my wife's brothers gave me 30 days to leave my home. I just smiled, packed a bag, and quietly left. The next morning, he got a visitor. The police were at his door. The thing about grief is that it doesn't arrive alone. It brings company. Uninvited guests who wear the face of concern but speak the language of opportunity. People who mistake your silence for weakness, your shock for compliance, your mourning for surrender. I learned this on a Tuesday, the day we buried Sarah. The chapel was too small for the crowd, or maybe grief just takes up more space than we account for. People pressed against walls papered in pale cream, their whispers creating a low hum that filled every corner. The air smelled of lilies and furniture polish, that particular cocktail of scents that belongs exclusively to funeral homes, as if they order it in bulk from some supplier of sorrow. I sat in the front row because that's where widowers sit. First row, center. Like reserved seating at a theater, except the show is your life falling apart in real time, and everyone's watching to see how you'll perform grief. Will he cry? Will he speak? Will he collapse? I did none of those things. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, looking at the casket, cherrywood, per her wishes, nothing ostentatious, and I thought about the fact that Sarah would have hated this. The fuss, the flowers, the way her mother kept touching the casket like she could will her daughter back to life through sheer maternal persistence. Sarah would have wanted something simple. A backyard gathering, people telling stories, laughter mixed with tears, music she actually liked, not this somber organ rendition of Amazing Grace that sounded like it was being played underwater. But Sarah wasn't here to plan her own funeral. And I was too numb to fight about it. 23 years of marriage doesn't prepare you for the moment it ends. People think it does. They imagine that loving someone for decades means you've somehow rehearsed their death in your head, that you've built up calluses against the inevitable. But that's not how it works. Every year together is an armor. It's debt. It's 23 years of shared mornings and private jokes, and the specific way she'd tilt her head when she was thinking. 23 years of a person becoming so interwoven with your existence that when they're suddenly gone, you feel like someone's reached into your chest and removed an organ you didn't know you needed to survive. Sarah died on a Thursday. An aneurysm. Sudden. The kind of thing doctors describe with words like instant and painless, as if those adjectives are supposed to be comforting. As if knowing she didn't suffer makes it hurt less that she was laughing at something on her phone one moment and gone the next. We were supposed to grow old together. We'd talked about it, even. Where we'd retire. Whether we'd sell the house or die in it. Whether we'd be the kind of old people who walked slowly through grocery stores or the kind who shocked their kids by taking up parasailing at 70. Now I was going to grow old alone. If I grew old at all. The minister was speaking. I should have been listening. He was saying something about eternal rest and peace and God's plan. All the standard deflections we use to make death seem like part of some cosmic design rather than the cruel, random violence it actually is. Sarah wasn't religious. Neither was I. But her mother was, and her mother had made the arrangements, and I let her. Because what was I going to do? Fight a grieving mother about theology while my own grief was busy dismantling me from the inside out? I felt a hand on my shoulder. I didn't turn around. I knew who it was by the weight of it, the particular pressure that spoke of entitlement rather than comfort. John, Sarah's brother. The hand squeezed, a gesture that was probably meant to seem supportive but felt more like a claim being staked. A reminder of presence, of family, of blood ties that, in John's mind, superseded the mere legal contract of marriage. I'd known John for 25 years, 2 years before I married his sister. In that quarter century, I'd watched him fail upward through life with the confidence of a man who'd never been held accountable for anything. Failed businesses blamed on partners. Failed relationships blamed on women. Failed investments blamed on markets. John had a gift for being the protagonist of his own story, and in that story, nothing was ever his fault. But he was good at showing up. At weddings and funerals, at Christmas dinners and birthday parties. John was always there with his wide smile and firm handshake and the ability to dominate a room simply by assuming he belonged at its center. Sarah had loved him despite his flaws, or maybe because of them. She'd had a soft spot for broken things, a tendency to see potential where others saw patterns. I'd never shared her optimism. The service ended the way these things do, with people standing, moving, the spell of forced stillness breaking into the chaos of social obligation. Hugs needed to be given. Hands needed to be shaken. Condolences needed to be received with the appropriate mix of gratitude and stoicism. I stood. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Heavy. Uncooperative. I'd barely eaten in days. Sleep came in 30-minute intervals broken by the sound of Sarah's absence. The lack of her breathing. The missing weight on her side of the bed. The silence where there should have been the small noises of her existence. The receiving line formed. People filed past me, offering variations on the same theme. I'm so sorry for your loss. She was wonderful. If you need anything. Empty phrases, well-intentioned, but ultimately meaningless, because what I needed was Sarah back, and none of them could provide that. I shook hands. I accepted hugs. I said, thank you approximately 200 times. And then John was in front of me. He didn't hug me. That wasn't his style. Instead, he gripped my shoulder again, that same proprietary touch, and leaned in close enough that I could smell the mint on his breath. He'd been chewing gum during the service, during his own sister's funeral. We need to talk, he said. Not, how are you holding up? Not, I can't believe she's gone. Not even, I loved her too. We need to talk. For words that carry their own weight. For words that mean the conversation won't be pleasant. That whatever's coming next isn't about comfort or support. Later, I said. My voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. Distant. Echo why? Not quite mine. No, John said. His grip tightened. Now, we're at the house. But today, Thomas, we need to handle some things. Handle some things. I wanted to ask what things needed handling on the day we buried his sister. What could possibly be so urgent that it couldn't wait until I'd at least changed out of my funeral suit? But I didn't ask, because somewhere in the fog of grief, in the numb space where my normal personality used to live, a small alarm bell started ringing. Quiet, distant, but persistent. Something was wrong. The repast was held at what John kept calling the family home. My home. The house I'd built. Not metaphorically. Literally. The house I'd designed, financed, and overseen the construction of 17 years ago. The house Sarah and I had picked the lot for, had argued about paint colors for, had measured and planned and dreamed into existence. But John called it the family home. Like it was some ancestral estate passed down through generations rather than a piece of property I owned outright, mortgage-free, with my name on the deed and my money in its bones. The house sat on 3 acres outside the city, surrounded by oak trees that were here long before we were and would be here long after. It wasn't ostentatious. Sarah had never wanted that, but it was substantial. For bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, an office, a sunroom she'd used for her paintings. High ceilings, big windows, the kind of space that felt peaceful rather than empty, even though now it felt like both. People filled it now. Sarah's family, some friends, the professional mourners who show up to these things with their casseroles and concerned expressions. They moved through rooms I'd built, eating food off counters I'd installed, looking at photos on walls I'd painted. And somehow, I felt like the intruder. Maybe that's what grief does. Makes you a stranger in your own life. I found myself in the kitchen, my kitchen, though I had to keep reminding myself of that. Watching Sarah's mother arrange sandwiches on a platter. She'd barely spoken to me since Sarah died. Grief had turned her into a ghost of herself, moving through tasks with mechanical precision, as if keeping busy would keep her from falling apart. I understood the impulse. Can I help? I asked. She looked at me like she'd forgotten I was there. No, she said. Not unkindly. Just empty. You should sit down, Thomas. You look exhausted. I was exhausted. But sitting down felt impossible. Standing still felt impossible. Existing felt impossible. Mrs. Morrison. Carol, she said. After 23 years of marriage to her daughter, she still needed me to use her first name. Please. Carol, I want you to know that I. Not now, she said, and her voice cracked. Just a little. Just enough to show the fault line running through her composure. Please. I can't, not now. So I didn't. I moved into the living room instead, where clusters of people spoke in hushed tones about anything except the woman we'd just buried. Traffic. Weather. The new restaurant downtown. Death makes people uncomfortable, so they fill the space with life's most mundane details, as if small talk can somehow dilute grief. I was looking for somewhere to stand that didn't require conversation when I saw them. John and his 2 brothers, Michael and David, huddled together near the fireplace. The three of them together always reminded me of a corporate boardroom or a football huddle. Michael, the eldest at 52, had their father's build and their mother's strategic mind. David, the youngest at 46, had inherited the family's gift for charm without the ambition to weaponize it. And John, right in the middle at 49, had somehow distilled the worst qualities of both. Michael's ruthlessness without his intelligence, David's social ease without his genuine warmth. They were talking in low voices, their heads bent together. And they kept glancing at me. Not subtly, not with the careful discretion you'd use at a funeral. They looked at me the way generals look at territory they're planning to occupy. Michael noticed me noticing. He said something to John, who turned and made eye contact. Then John smiled. Not a warm smile. Not a we're in this together smile. A smile that said I know something you don't. He gestured toward the hallway. Toward my office. My office, in my house, that I built. But I followed him anyway. Because I was tired. Because I was grieving. Because 23 years of family dinners and holidays had trained me to defer to the Morrison brothers on matters of family business, even when I knew I shouldn't. We filed into the office, all four of us. Me and the three brothers. The room suddenly felt smaller with them in it, like they'd brought their own gravity and everything was tilting in their direction. John closed the door. The sound of it clicking shut felt loud. Final. Thomas, John said, and his voice had changed. The funeral-appropriate solemnity was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost businesslike. We need to talk about practical matters. Practical matters. I sat down in my desk chair. They remained standing. A power play, intentional or not. Michael leaned against the bookshelf. David stood by the window. John positioned himself directly in front of me. What practical matters? I asked. The house, John said. Assets. Sarah's estate. Her wishes. Sarah's wishes were very clear, I said. We have wills. A trust. Everything's already arranged. Right, John said, drawing the word out. About that. We've been thinking, as a family, that maybe those arrangements were made hastily. Maybe they don't reflect what Sarah would have actually wanted, given everything. Given everything? Given how long you two were together, Michael interjected. His voice was softer than John's, but somehow more dangerous. Like a knife wrapped in velvet. Given that you were a couple for a long time, but, well, things change, don't they? I looked at him. Really looked at him. Michael was wearing a dark suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His wedding ring caught the light. His third marriage. Each wife progressively younger than the last. He was talking about Sarah's wishes like he'd ever spent 5 minutes understanding her while she was alive. What are you implying? I asked. We're not implying anything, David said quickly. He'd always been the peacemaker, the one who tried to smooth over the conflicts the other two created. We're just saying that. Well, Thomas, you have to understand our position. This house belonged to our father before he passed. Sarah grew up here. It has sentimental value to the family. I felt something cold move through my chest. This isn't the house Sarah grew up in, I said carefully. That house was sold 15 years ago. This house, the one we're standing in, I built 7 years after we got married. Right, John said dismissively. But emotionally, it's still the family home. And we all think, that it makes sense for it to stay in the family. I am family, I said. The words came out harder than I intended. Sharp enough that David flinched. John didn't. You were married to Sarah, John said. That made you family. But now, he spread his hands in a gesture that was probably meant to look sympathetic. Now you're our late sister's widower, which is different, and we need to think about what's best for everyone. What's best for everyone, I repeated slowly. Or what's best for you. Don't be like that, Michael said. We're trying to be reasonable here. We're trying to make this easy for you. Easy for me. Yes, John said. He pulled a piece of paper from his jacket pocket, unfolded it, placed it on my desk with the careful precision of a man who'd rehearsed this moment. We've drawn up an agreement. Very fair. Very generous, given the circumstances. You'll have 30 days to make arrangements. Find a place. Get your affairs in order. We'll even help with moving costs if needed. I stared at the paper. I didn't pick it up. Didn't read it. Didn't need to. Because I understood now what was happening. They were evicting me. From my own house. On the day we buried Sarah. You're joking, I said. My voice sounded distant again. Like I was hearing myself from another room. We're not. Michael said. Look, Thomas, let's be honest. You and Sarah were married a long time, but you were never really. Well, you worked in middle management, right? At that accounting firm? Sarah never mentioned you having significant savings. And this house, this property, it's worth close to $2 million. We can't just let that slip away because of sentiment. Middle management. He said it like it was a diagnosis. Like he was being kind by pointing out my condition. I'd been the CFO of a regional accounting firm for the past 12 years. Before that, I'd spent 8 years as a senior analyst at a consulting company. Before that, I'd built a portfolio of investments that had quietly grown while these 3 idiots cycled through failed ventures and bankruptcies. But I'd never talked about money. Sarah and I hadn't lived ostentatiously. We'd driven practical cars, taken reasonable vacations, lived comfortably, but not flashily. And now they'd mistaken restraint for poverty. I see, I said. We knew you'd understand, John said. Relief flooded his voice. He'd been expecting a fight. 30 days. That's plenty of time. And really, Thomas, it's for the best. This house is too big for one person anyway. Too many memories. You'll want a fresh start. A fresh start. Sarah had been dead for 6 days. We'd buried her 3 hours ago. And they were giving me 30 days to leave my own house so they could sell it and split the money. I looked at each of them in turn. Michael with his expensive suit and cheaper morals. David with his apologetic expression that meant nothing. John with his satisfied smile, already counting his inheritance. And I made a decision. Not the decision they expected. Not the decision I would have made if Sarah were here. I stood up. You're right, I said quietly. 30 days is plenty of time. John blinked. He'd been prepared for arguments, for protests, for emotional appeals to family and decency. My agreement clearly confused him. So you'll sign the agreement? He asked. I don't need to sign anything, I said. You've made your position clear. I'll be out in less than 30 days. You have my word. Well, Michael said, and he actually smiled. We appreciate you being reasonable about this, Thomas. We really do. It makes everything so much simpler. Simpler. I'll need a few days to pack, I said. Make arrangements. Say goodbye to the place. Of course, John said magnanimously. Take your time. Within reason. 1 week, I said. I'll be gone in 1 week. That's very, David started. I'd like you to leave now, I said. My voice hadn't changed. Still quiet. Still measured. But something in my tone made them all shift slightly. The house is still full of guests, John said. We should. I'd like you to leave my office, I clarified. Now. There was a moment of tension. Brief. Charged. The 3 of them weighing whether to push back, whether to remind me that they'd just declared this house wasn't mine anymore. But they were cowards at heart. All 3 of them. They'd chosen this moment precisely because they thought grief had made me weak, that shock had made me compliant. They filed out. John paused at the door. Thomas, we really do think this is for the best. For everyone. You'll see that eventually. I didn't respond. He left. I sat back down at my desk. The piece of paper with their agreement still sat where John had placed it. I picked it up now, read it properly. It was even worse than I'd thought. Not just eviction. They wanted me to sign away any claim to Sarah's estate, any potential inheritance, any joint assets. In exchange, they'd generously provide me with $10,000 for moving expenses and temporary housing. $10,000 for a house worth $2 million. For the life Sarah and I built together. For 23 years of marriage. I folded the paper carefully, placed it in my desk drawer, and then I opened my laptop. Because here's the thing about being the CFO of a successful firm. You learn to document everything. Every transaction, every agreement, every asset. You learn to create paper trails and maintain records and protect yourself from people who think your competence is their opportunity. I pulled up the files I needed. The deed to the house. In my name. Solely. The trust Sarah and I had established 5 years ago. Ironclad. Professionally drafted by the best estate attorney in the state. The documentation of every dollar I'd put into this property, every renovation, every improvement. The investment portfolio they didn't know about. The retirement accounts. The savings. The assets I'd quietly accumulated while they assumed I was barely scraping by. Sarah had known. Of course she had. We'd built this together, planned it together. She'd been the artist, the dreamer. I'd been the one who made sure the dreams had foundations. But I'd never advertised it. Never flaunted it. never given her brothers any reason to think I was anything other than what Michael called middle management. And now that discretion was about to become their downfall, I started making calls. First to my attorney, Jonathan Burke. He drafted our estate documents. He knew exactly what was legal and what wasn't, and he answered on the second ring. "Thomas," he said, and his voice was heavy with condolence. "I heard about Sarah. I'm so sorry. If there's anything I can do." "There is," I said. "I need you to prepare some documents. And I need it done by tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" "Thomas, I know this must be difficult, but—" "Jonathan," I said quietly, "Sarah's brothers just tried to evict me from my own house. They gave me 30 days to leave and asked me to sign away my rights to her estate in exchange for $10,000. There was a long pause. "They what?" "You heard me." Another pause. "Then, what do you need?" I told him. Then I called my financial advisor. Then my accountant. Then the property management company I'd been considering hiring, but had kept on retainer just in case. Each conversation was brief, professional, precise. By the time the last guest started leaving the house, my house, I had a plan. Not a revenge plan, exactly. Revenge implied emotion, and I was too numb for that. This was something else. This was justice. This was going to be a lesson in assumptions. I spent the next 3 days packing. Not everything, just the essentials. Clothes, documents, some of Sarah's things, her jewelry, her sketchbooks, the painting of the oak tree she'd done from our bedroom window. Items that had value beyond money. Things that couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet. John called twice. Both times, I let it go to voicemail. "Just checking in," the first message said. "Want to make sure you're doing okay. Remember, we're here to help with the transition." The transition. Like I was changing jobs instead of being forced out of my home by my dead wife's family. The second message was less friendly. "Thomas, we need to know your timeline. We have people interested in the property. The sooner you're out, the sooner we can move forward with the sale. Call me back." I didn't. Instead, I continued methodically sorting through 17 years of accumulated life. It's strange what you keep. What seems important. What turns out to be just weight. I found a box of Sarah's art supplies in the sunroom. Tubes of paint dried into uselessness. Brushes stiff with disuse. She'd stopped painting about 5 years ago, claimed she'd lost the inspiration. I thought it was temporary. Just a phase. Now she'd never pick up a brush again, and these relics of her creativity would just be trash to whoever bought the house next. If they bought it, which they wouldn't. But I was getting ahead of myself. On the 4th day, Carol Morrison stopped by. She knocked, even though she had keys, had visited this house hundreds of times over the years. The knock was formal, distant, like she was visiting a stranger. I opened the door. She looked awful. Grief had carved new lines into her face. Her eyes were red-rimmed, perpetually wet. She'd aged a decade in a week. "Thomas," she said, "can I come in?" I stepped aside. She moved through the entryway like someone walking through a museum, looking at everything with the careful attention of someone trying to memorize details before they're gone. Her daughter's life, packed into boxes. Her daughter's home, about to be vacated. "I heard," she said finally, "about what John did. What they're asking you to do. Did he tell you?" "Michael mentioned it. He thought I should know. Thought I'd—" She stopped. Started again. "They thought I'd agree with them. Do you?" She looked at me then. Really looked at me. For the first time since Sarah died, there was something in her eyes besides grief. Anger. "No," she said. "Sarah would have been furious. She is," her voice cracked. "She would have been furious if she knew. But she's not here," I said gently. "No." Carol's composure broke. Tears spilled over, tracking down her cheeks. "She's not. And they're using that. Using her death to what? Make money? Steal from you? I don't even understand what they're thinking." I guided her to the couch, got her water, waited while she cried. When she'd collected herself, she said, "You're really leaving?" "Yes." "Where will you go?" "I have options," I said. Which was true. I had several options. None of which I was going to discuss with Carol, because what she didn't know, John couldn't extract from her. "Thomas, I want you to know that I don't support this. What they're doing, it's wrong. This was your home with Sarah. They have no right." "Carol," I said quietly. "It's okay. It's not okay. None of this is okay. I know. But fighting with them won't bring Sarah back. And it won't change what they've decided." She looked at me like I was a puzzle she couldn't solve. Like my calm acceptance was somehow more confusing than anger would have been. "You're a good man," Thomas, she said finally. Sarah knew that. I know that. I'm sorry her brothers don't. After she left, I stood in the living room for a long time, looking at the space Sarah and I had filled with our life. The furniture we'd picked together, the paint colors we'd debated, the photos on the walls, chronicling 23 years of shared existence. I wasn't going to miss this house. I was going to miss the version of it that had Sarah in it. But that version was already gone. I left on a Monday morning, 5 days after the funeral, 2 days ahead of my promised timeline. I'd loaded my car the night before, a simple sedan, nothing flashy, the kind of vehicle that disappears in traffic. Everything I was taking fit in the trunk and back seat. The rest was either packed into a storage unit or had been donated. The house was mostly empty now. Echo why. The furniture remained. They'd wanted it for staging, but personal effects were gone. Books, photos, mementos, anything that made this our home instead of just a property. I walked through each room one final time. The kitchen where Sarah had attempted cooking experiments that sometimes succeeded and often didn't, where we'd shared late-night snacks and early morning coffee. The sunroom where she'd painted, where light spilled through windows I designed specifically for her, angled to catch the morning sun. The bedroom where we'd slept beside each other for thousands of nights, where I'd held her hand the morning she died, not knowing those were our last moments together. The office where her brothers had tried to steal from me. I wasn't angry. That was the strange part. I'd expected fury, expected the kind of white-hot rage that people describe in moments of injustice. But all I felt was a cold, clear certainty, a sense of purpose. They'd mistaken my grief for weakness, my silence for compliance. They were about to learn the difference. I set the keys on the kitchen counter, not because I didn't own the house anymore, but because I wouldn't need them. Then I walked out. The morning was cold and clear. November in its full autumnal glory, the kind of day Sarah would have wanted to paint. Trees in their dying colors. Sky so blue it hurt to look at. The kind of beauty that makes mortality feel both precious and cruel. I got in my car, pulled out of the driveway for what would be the last time, drove past the oak trees that had stood sentinel over our life here. And I smiled. Not a bitter smile, not a vengeful one, just the smile of a man who knows something other people don't. Because here's what John, Michael, and David didn't know. The house they thought they were inheriting, the property they were planning to sell, the $2 million they were already spending in their heads. It wasn't theirs. It had never been theirs. And in about 12 hours, they were going to find out exactly how thoroughly they'd miscalculated. John Morrison woke up Tuesday morning feeling better than he had in a week. His sister was dead, which was tragic, truly tragic. He'd miss her. They all would. But her death had also solved a problem he'd been worrying about for months. Money. Specifically, the lack of it. John's latest business venture, a craft brewery that was going to revolutionize the local beer scene, had failed spectacularly. Turned out that having a good idea wasn't enough. You also needed things like business acumen, capital management, and the ability to actually brew beer that didn't taste like carbonated regret. The brewery had burned through his savings in 8 months. Then burned through his credit, then burned through his reputation with anyone who might have been willing to invest in his next brilliant plan. He'd been looking at bankruptcy. Again. And then Sarah had died. And suddenly there was a house. A beautiful, valuable, mortgage-free house sitting on prime real estate. A house that was practically falling into his lap because Thomas, poor, grief-stricken, middle management Thomas, didn't have the spine to fight for it. The 30-day eviction had been Michael's idea, but John had embraced it enthusiastically. Why wait? Why let Thomas drag his feet? Give him a deadline, create urgency, get him out fast. Then list the property, split the proceeds 3 ways, and suddenly John's financial problems would be solved. Simple, clean, fair, even, when you thought about it. Thomas had enjoyed the house for years, lived there rent-free, supported by Sarah's family connections. Now it was time for him to move on. Time for the property to return to the people who actually had Morrison blood in their veins. John had already talked to a real estate agent, already discussed listing prices and marketing strategies, already calculated that his third of the sale would net him roughly $660,000. Enough to pay off his debts, start fresh, maybe invest in that food truck franchise he'd been researching. Thomas had left yesterday, a day early, even. Practically ran out of the house. Probably embarrassed. Probably realized he didn't have a leg to stand on legally. which he didn't. John had consulted with a lawyer. Nothing official, just a friend of a friend conversation over drinks. But the guy had confirmed what John already suspected. Property laws in their state favored blood relatives. And without kids, without a will that specifically prevented it, Sarah's estate would default to her family. Sure, Thomas might try to fight it. Might hire a lawyer, make noise about his rights as a surviving spouse. But that would take time, money, energy, all things Thomas didn't have while drowning in grief and shock. By the time Thomas figured out what was happening, the house would be sold and the money would be distributed. John poured himself coffee in the kitchen of his rented condo. Checked his phone. 2 missed calls from Michael. Probably wanted to discuss next steps. Move forward with the sale. Start making real plans. He was about to call back when his doorbell rang. John frowned. It was 7 in the morning. Who the hell visited at 7 in the morning? He opened the door. 2 men in dark suits stood on his doorstep. Behind them, a police cruiser was parked at the curb. John Morrison? One of them asked. Yes. They showed him badges. FBI. John's coffee-warmed stomach went cold. We need to ask you some questions, the first agent said. About a property located at 4782 Oakwood Drive. And about some documents that have come to our attention regarding attempted fraud and coercion. John stared at them. Fraud? What are you talking about? Perhaps we should discuss this inside, the second agent said. It wasn't a question. They moved past him, into his condo, into his space. And suddenly John felt very small in his own home, the way prey feels when predators have marked them for the hunt. I don't understand, John said. There's been some mistake. The house, that's my sister's house. Family property. We're just trying to settle her estate. The house, the first agent said, pulling out a tablet and showing John an official document, is registered solely to Thomas Mitchell. Has been since its construction 17 years ago, which you knew or should have known, before presenting Mr. Mitchell with fraudulent documentation attempting to coerce him into abandoning his legal property and assets. Fraudulent? It wasn't fraudulent, it was just. Just what? The second agent asked. Just an attempt to steal a $2 million property from a grieving widower by exploiting his emotional state and lying about your legal rights to said property. John felt the walls closing in. I want to call my lawyer, he said. That's probably a good idea, the first agent agreed. You're going to need one. The thing about lies is that they require infrastructure. They need support systems, collaborative belief, people willing to either actively participate in the fiction or passive enough not to question it. John's lie, that the house belonged to the Morrison family, that Thomas had no real claim to it, that they were legally entitled to evict him and split the proceeds, had required Michael and David to go along with it. Required them to believe, or pretend to believe, that their assertion of family rights superseded legal documentation. And it had required Thomas to be too grief-stricken to fight back. They'd gotten 1 out of 3. Michael received his visit at his downtown office, where he worked as a consultant for various businesses that needed someone with a prestigious last name and enough charisma to make failed ventures sound like learning opportunities. The federal agents walked past his receptionist like she didn't exist, knocked once on his door, and entered before he could respond. Michael Morrison? Yes, what's this about? They told him. Michael, to his credit, remained calmer than John had. He asked to see documentation, reviewed the property deed with the careful attention of someone looking for loopholes, examined the trust documents that Sarah and Thomas had established. Then he made his own call to his lawyer. 20 minutes later, he emerged from his office looking like someone who'd just watched his life's narrative rewrite itself in real time. I was operating under a misunderstanding, he told the agents, about the property's ownership. My brother John provided me with information that I now realize was incorrect. The agents nodded, wrote notes, asked questions about the agreement John had drafted, the one demanding Thomas sign away his rights. Did you participate in creating this document? They asked. I provided input on language, Michael admitted. And you knew, when you provided this input, that Thomas Mitchell was the sole owner of the property? Silence. Because Michael had known. Or at least, he'd suspected. But suspecting and confirming are different things, and it's easy to avoid confirming what you don't want to know. David got his visit at home, where he lived with his second wife and 3 teenagers who stared from the upstairs landing as agents questioned their father in the living room. David broke faster than his brothers. John said it was family property, he explained, his voice climbing into defensive registers. He said Sarah had always wanted it to stay in the family. I didn't. I wasn't trying to steal anything. I thought we were honoring her wishes. Mr. Mitchell's attorney has provided us with extensive documentation, one of the agents said, including recordings of the meeting where you and your brothers presented Mr. Mitchell with eviction demands. Were you aware that recording such meetings is legal in this state? David hadn't been aware. None of them had been, because they'd assumed Thomas was too grief-stricken to think, too overwhelmed to protect himself, too weak to plan. They'd forgotten that Thomas had spent 30 years working in positions that required precision, documentation, and the ability to see 3 moves ahead. They'd forgotten that silence isn't the same as submission. By Tuesday afternoon, all 3 brothers had lawyers. By Tuesday evening, those lawyers were having very uncomfortable conversations with federal investigators about wire fraud, attempted coercion, and elder abuse statutes that, while not technically applicable, Thomas was only 54, demonstrated a pattern of exploiting vulnerable populations. And by Tuesday night, Carol Morrison was sitting in her living room, listening to John try to explain how everything had gotten so confused. It was a misunderstanding, John said. He'd shown up at her house unannounced, looking like he hadn't slept. A mistake. We honestly thought the house was part of Sarah's estate. Even though the deed shows Thomas as the sole owner? Carol asked quietly. We didn't check the deed that carefully. We just assumed. You assumed you could bully a grieving man out of his home, Carol said. You assumed you could cash in on your sister's death. That's not fair, Mom. We were trying to help. Trying to make sure the family. Don't. Carol's voice cracked. Don't make this about family. If you'd cared about family, you would have cared about Thomas. You would have checked on him, supported him. Instead, you circled like vultures before your sister's body was even cold. I needed the money, John said, and his voice broke too. I'm drowning, Mom. The brewery failed. I owe people. I thought. You thought you'd found an easy solution, Carol said. You thought grief made Thomas weak enough to steal from. I wasn't stealing. I was. You were stealing, Carol said firmly. And now you'll face the consequences. The thing people don't understand about estate planning is that it's basically warfare preparation. Not warfare in the sense of violence. Warfare in the sense of strategy. Defense. Building fortifications that will stand long after you're gone. Protecting what you've built from people who think your absence means your wishes no longer matter. Sarah and I had started estate planning 5 years ago, after a cancer scare that turned out to be nothing but reminded us both that nothing lasts forever. We'd hired Jonathan Burke, who specialized in complex trusts and asset protection. We'd spent months discussing scenarios, planning for contingencies, making sure that no matter what happened, divorce, death, disability, our assets would be distributed according to our actual wishes, not according to state default laws or family assumptions. You need to think about your family, Jonathan had warned us during one session. Not to be cynical, but death brings out behaviors in people that surprise them. Nice people become grasping. Reasonable people become irrational. You need to make your wishes so clear, so legally airtight, that there's no room for interpretation or challenge. So we had. The house was in my name only, not out of distrust for Sarah, but because I'd built it before we established the trust, had financed it entirely with my own assets. When we created the trust, we decided to keep the house outside of it, simpler for tax purposes and liability protection. Sarah's assets, her art, her personal accounts, some investments her grandmother had left her, went into the trust, with me as the primary beneficiary and specific distributions for her family. Small amounts, token gestures, a few $1,000s for each brother, $20,000 for her mother. The bulk of her estate came to me because that's what she wanted. They won't like it, she'd said when we reviewed the documents. They don't have to like it, I'd replied. John will contest it. Let him. Jonathan says it's bulletproof. She'd smiled then, a little sadly. My brothers think I'm just the artistic one, the soft one. They forget I grew up watching them manipulate our parents. I know exactly how they operate. Now, 5 years later, her prediction was coming true. Except she'd prepared for it. We both had. I spent Tuesday at a hotel 40 minutes outside the city. Nothing fancy, just a clean room with a decent bed and Wi-Fi strong enough for what I needed to do. I ordered room service for breakfast. The first real meal I'd eaten in over a week, and settled in with my laptop. Jonathan had been busy. His emails filled my inbox. Updates, confirmations, documentation that he'd filed with the court, with law enforcement, with every relevant authority. The brothers' attempt to evict me had technically violated several laws. Not just property law, though they'd done that spectacularly, but also elder abuse statutes, fraud regulations, and coercion laws. The fact that they'd put their demands in writing, that I'd recorded our meeting legally in our one-party consent state, and that they tried to pressure me into signing documents they knew were fraudulent, that made it prosecutable. Jonathan had taken all of that to the FBI's white-collar crime division, had filed formal complaints, had provided documentation so thorough, so damning, that federal agents had shown up at doors before breakfast. My phone buzzed. Jonathan calling. They're panicking, he said without preamble. All three of them. Michael's trying to claim ignorance. David's saying he was misled. John's looking at serious charges. He drafted the fraudulent agreement. He was the instigator. What happens now? I asked. Depends on the investigation. Best case for them? Civil penalties, paying your legal fees, and never being able to contest Sarah's estate. Worst case? Fraud charges. Prison time for John, maybe. Steep fines for all three. I was quiet. Thomas, Jonathan said gently. You could make this go away. Drop the complaints. Accept an apology. Move on. Could I? Legally? Yes. You're the victim here. If you don't want to pursue charges, that's your right. I thought about John's hand on my shoulder at the funeral. About the piece of paper on my desk demanding I vacate my home in 30 days. About Michael's dismissive mention of middle management, like my career was something to be embarrassed about. About Sarah, who'd loved her brothers despite everything, who'd always tried to see the best in them even when they showed her the worst. What would she want? I'll think about it, I told Jonathan. But I already knew what I was going to do. I agreed to meet with them on Friday. For days after I'd left the house. 1 week since Sarah's funeral. A lifetime since everything was normal. Jonathan advised against it. Let the lawyers handle it, he said. There's no reason for you to have direct contact with them. They tried to rob you, Thomas. They don't deserve the courtesy of a face-to-face meeting. I'm not doing it for them, I said. I'm doing it for me. And for Sarah. We met at a coffee shop in neutral territory. Not near the house. Not near any of their homes or businesses. Just a generic cafe chain with mediocre coffee and uncomfortable chairs and no memories attached to it. I arrived first. Chose a table in the back corner. Ordered black coffee I didn't drink. They arrived together, a united front that was already showing cracks. Michael looked exhausted, his expensive suit unable to hide the weight of stress. David looked sick, pale, and jittery. John looked angry, like the world had betrayed him by enforcing consequences. They sat down across from me. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Michael said, Thomas, we owe you an apology. Do you? Yes. He looked at his brothers, neither of whom met his eyes. We acted hastily. We made assumptions about the property, about Sarah's estate, about your circumstances. Those assumptions were wrong. And the way we approached you, at the funeral, demanding you leave, that was inappropriate. We're sorry. It was a good apology. Structured. Probably written by his lawyer. It was also completely hollow. You're sorry you got caught, I said. That's not. You're sorry federal agents showed up at your doors. You're sorry your attempt to steal from me was documented and prosecutable. You're sorry your mother knows what you tried to do. But you're not sorry you did it. Because if I'd left that house like you demanded, if I'd signed your fraudulent agreement and disappeared, you'd be listing the property right now. Splitting the money. Congratulating yourselves on a problem solved. Silence. John's jaw was clenched. David was studying his hands. Michael was trying to maintain eye contact and failing. What do you want from us? John asked finally. An apology? You have it. Money? Name your price. Just tell us what it'll take to make this go away. Make what go away? The federal investigation. The charges. Your lawyer's gone scorched earth, Thomas. Fraud accusations, elder abuse claims. Do you know what that'll do to us? To our reputations? Our families. Your families, I repeated. Like Sarah was my family. Like this marriage was my family. She was our sister, John snapped. And I was her husband. For 23 years. Which meant something. Which meant I was part of your family too, whether you liked it or not. But the day we buried her, You made it very clear that you never saw me that way. I was never family to you. I was just someone in the way of money. That's not true, David said quietly. I looked at him. Of the three, David at least seemed genuinely remorseful. Or maybe just genuinely weak. Isn't it? Then explain to me why you showed up at my house, that I built, that I own, and tried to evict me before Sarah's body was even in the ground. Explain to me how that's family. We made a mistake, David said. A terrible mistake. But we're begging, for a chance to make it right. What can we do? What could they do? They could bring Sarah back. Could give me another 23 years. Could undo the aneurysm and the funeral, and the moment John put his hand on my shoulder and decided my grief made me easy prey. But they couldn't do any of that. Here's what's going to happen, I said. The federal investigation will continue. I'm not dropping charges. If they decide to prosecute, that's between you and them. Thomas, Michael started. I'm not finished. Sarah's estate will be distributed according to her will and our trust. You'll each receive what she designated for you. Not $1 more. We don't want her money, David said. Yes, you do. You just wanted mine more. But you'll take what she left you, and you'll be grateful for it, because it's more than you deserve. I stood up. Wait, John said. That's it. You're just what? Letting this play out? Destroying our lives. I'm not destroying anything, I said. You did that yourselves. I'm just not stopping the consequences anymore. Sarah wouldn't want this, John said desperately. She wouldn't want her family torn apart. And that was the thing that broke through my carefully maintained composure. Don't, I said, and my voice came out harder than I'd intended. Don't you dare use Sarah as justification for anything. Sarah spent her whole life making excuses for you three, covering for your failures, lending money she knew she'd never see again. She loved you despite every reason not to. And the moment she died, you circled her memory like vultures. I picked up my coffee cup. Still full, still cold. Sarah would have wanted you to be better, I said. To be the family she always believed you could be. But you're not. You never were. And I'm done pretending otherwise. I left them there, walked out of the coffee shop into November cold, into air that tasted like freedom. Behind me, I heard John say something. Could have been wait, or please, or any number of desperate syllables. I didn't turn around. The official distribution of Sarah's estate happened 3 weeks later. Jonathan handled most of it. Formal readings of wills are mostly a Hollywood invention, but there are still legal procedures, required notifications, official documentation. Each brother received a certified letter outlining their inheritance from Sarah's estate. Michael, $3,000. David, $3,000. John, $3,000. And a note, in Sarah's handwriting, that Jonathan had kept sealed until this moment. To my brothers, I love you. I always have. But I also know you. Know that you'll see my death as an opportunity rather than a loss. I hope I'm wrong. I hope you've grown. But if you're reading this and angry about the amount I've left you, then I was right about you. And I'm not sorry. The money goes to Thomas because he was my partner, my best friend, and the only person who never treated my love as currency. Be better. I believe you can be. Sarah. Carol called me after they received their letters. She knew. Carol said, and she was crying. She knew exactly what they'd do. Sarah was smarter than people gave her credit for, I said. She loved them anyway. She did. Do you think they'll learn from this? I was quiet for a moment, thinking about 3 men who'd spent their whole lives being bailed out, forgiven, given second chances that turned into third and fourth and infinite chances. I don't know, I said honestly. I hope so. For their sakes. What will you do now? Carol asked. It was a good question. The house was still mine, still empty, still echoing with the ghost of the life Sarah and I had built there. I could move back, could reclaim the space, could prove that I'd won, that I'd defended what was mine, that they hadn't managed to push me out. But I didn't want to, because it wasn't about the house anymore. Maybe it never had been. I'm going to sell it, I told Carol. List it properly. Get fair market value. Use the money to start something new. Sarah would like that, Carol said. She never wanted you to be stuck in the past. No, I agreed. She didn't. The federal investigation took 3 months. In that time, I learned things about Sarah's brothers that I'd suspected but never confirmed. Michael had been stealing from his clients. Not much, a few thousand here, a few thousand there, but consistently. Enough that when investigators started pulling financial records, the pattern was unmistakable. The attempted theft of my house hadn't been an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern of behavior. David had been embezzling from his employer. Small amounts, carefully hidden. He'd convinced himself it wasn't really stealing, just borrowing, that he'd pay back eventually. Eventually never came. John's failed brewery had been funded partly with money from his mother. Money he told her was an investment, but had legally structured as a gift, meaning she'd never see a penny back whether the business succeeded or not. 3 brothers. 3 different variations of the same essential truth. They believed rules applied to other people. Sarah had known. Not the specifics, maybe, but the general pattern. The entitled attitude. The assumption that consequences were for others. And she'd structured her estate accordingly. She protected you. Jonathan told me over lunch one afternoon. We were meeting to finalize the house sale, to sign the last documents that would officially close this chapter. Even after death, she made sure they couldn't touch what you'd built together. She protected herself too, I said. Protected her legacy. Made sure they couldn't claim she'd promised them something she hadn't. Smart woman. The smartest. We were quiet for a moment. Then Jonathan said, the federal prosecutor offered them a deal. Michael and David can avoid prison if they pay restitution and accept probation. John's facing stiffer penalties. The amount he tried to steal from you, combined with the fraud against his mother, puts him in a different category. What will he get? 2 to 4 years, probably. Minimum security. Plus significant fines. I thought about John. About his failures and his excuses. About the way he'd smiled at Sarah's funeral, already counting money that was never his. I thought about Sarah, who'd loved him despite everything. He'll survive, I said. Is that what you want? For him to just survive? I want him to learn, I said. I want all 3 of them to learn that actions have consequences. That grief doesn't give them the right to exploit people. That family means something beyond shared DNA and opportunistic inheritance plans. Think they'll learn. I considered. Michael was already in therapy, according to Carol. Court mandated, but still. David had apparently confessed everything to his wife, had broken down crying, had claimed he wanted to be better. John was still angry, still claiming he'd been set up, still insisting he'd done nothing wrong. 2 out of 3, I said. Maybe. Jonathan nodded. Better odds than I'd have given them 4 months ago. I sold the house in February, 3 months after Sarah's death, 4 months after her funeral, a lifetime after the morning she died laughing at something on her phone. The real estate agent was professional, efficient. She didn't ask about the house's history, about why I was selling, about the empty spaces where photos used to hang. She just measured rooms and took pictures and listed the property at a price that reflected its true value. It sold in a week. A young family. 2 kids, another on the way. They walked through the empty rooms and saw potential, saw futures, saw the space Sarah and I had built but wouldn't get to finish living in. It's perfect, the wife said. She was holding her husband's hand, looking at the sunroom. I could paint here. The light is incredible. The light was incredible. Sarah had known that, had planned for that, had stood in that exact spot 17 years ago and said, this is where I'll paint. I almost told the woman about Sarah. Almost explained that an artist had designed this room specifically to capture that light. Almost offered to show her some of Sarah's paintings, to pass along techniques or insights or whatever wisdom I'd absorbed through osmosis after 2 decades of watching my wife create. But I didn't, because this was their house now, their fresh start, their empty canvas. They didn't need it haunted by the ghost of what came before. I signed the papers, transferred the deed, deposited the check, just over $2 million, minus agent fees and closing costs. And then I left. Carol helped me pack Sarah's remaining things. The items that had been in storage, waiting for me to decide what to do with them. Her art supplies, her favorite books, clothes that still smelled like her perfume. What will you do with it all? Carol asked. Some I'll keep, I said. The paintings, her journals, things that tell the story of who she was. And the rest. Donate it. Let someone else find joy in it. Sarah would have liked that. We worked in silence for a while, folding and packing and organizing the remnants of a life. Then Carol said, I'm proud of you, you know. I looked up. For what? For how you handled this. For not letting grief make you cruel. For holding my sons accountable without destroying them completely. They destroyed themselves, I said. Maybe. But you could have made it worse. You could have pushed for maximum prosecution. Could have sued them for emotional damages. Could have made sure they lost everything. Would that have brought Sarah back? No, Carol said softly. Nothing will. We finished packing in silence. 6 months after Sarah's death, I got a letter from John. It came to my new address. A modest condo downtown, nothing fancy, just a clean space with good light and no memories. The envelope was handwritten, forwarded through my lawyer because John didn't have my direct contact information anymore. I almost threw it away unopened. But curiosity won. The letter was 4 pages. Handwritten. The penmanship was shaky, like he'd written it multiple times, and this was the final version after many attempts. Thomas, it began. I don't expect you to read this. I wouldn't read it in your position. But my therapist says I need to write it anyway. Says I need to acknowledge what I did. Not to make you forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness. But to make myself face it. I was wrong. That's the simple version. The complicated version is that I've been wrong for a long time about a lot of things. About family. About money. About what I'm entitled to and what has to be earned. I've spent my whole life failing. Failed businesses. Failed marriages. Failed at being the kind of brother Sarah deserved. And every time I failed, someone bailed me out. Mom. Dad before he died. Sarah. Even Michael and David, in their own ways. We all enabled each other's worst behaviors and called it family loyalty. When Sarah died, I saw an opportunity. I hate admitting that. Hate that my first thought when my sister died was, how can I profit from this? But it was. I looked at you standing at her funeral, devastated and lost, and I thought he's weak right now. He won't fight. We can take what we want. I convinced myself I deserved it. Convinced myself the house was somehow owed to me because of blood, because of family name, because of some imaginary debt the universe had accumulated that I could cash in. I was wrong about all of it. The house was yours. The grief didn't make you weak. It made you human. And family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up, who stays, who builds something with you and doesn't abandon it the second things get hard. You were more family to Sarah than I ever was. I'm in prison now. Minimum security, but prison nonetheless. I have 2 years left on my sentence. 2 years to think about who I've been and who I could have been. 2 years to figure out how to be better. I don't know if I can be. Better, I mean. Change is hard. Patterns are comfortable even when they're destructive. But I'm trying. Not because I think you'll forgive me. Not because I think Sarah would forgive me, though I hope she would, wherever she is. I'm trying because I'm tired of being the person I've been. Tired of failing. Tired of hurting people and calling it survival. I'm sorry, Thomas, for what I tried to take. For how I treated you. For not seeing what Sarah saw in you until it was too late to matter. I'm sorry, John. I read the letter 3 times. Then I set it aside and didn't respond. Not because I hadn't forgiven him. Not because I wanted him to suffer longer. But because forgiveness wasn't the point. The point was that John was finally facing consequences. Finally being forced to look at his patterns instead of running from them. Finally learning that words like sorry have to be backed by actions, by change, by a sustained effort to be different. I couldn't absolve him of that work. Nobody could. I started traveling. Sarah and I had always planned to travel more. Had a list of places we wanted to see. Scotland, New Zealand, Japan, Peru. All the destinations we'd saved for when we had more time. We never got more time. But I had time now. Had money from the house sale. Had no obligations keeping me in one place. Had nothing but the rest of my life stretching ahead, empty and terrifying and full of possibility. So I went. First to Scotland, because Sarah had always wanted to see the Highlands. I scattered some of her ashes there. Not all of them, but enough. Stood on a cliff overlooking gray-green water and said goodbye to the woman who'd been my partner for 23 years. Then to New Zealand, to Japan, to places we'd dreamed about together. I took photos I'd never show her. Wrote journal entries she'd never read. Lived the trips we'd planned, carrying her ghost with me in memories and imagination. It hurt. Every beautiful view hurt because she wasn't there to see it. Every perfect moment hurt because I couldn't turn to her and say, remember this. Every sunrise hurt because it meant another day of life she wasn't living. But it also healed. Slowly. Incrementally. In ways I didn't notice until I looked back and realized I'd gone an entire day without crying. Then a week. Then a month. Grief doesn't end. Anyone who tells you it does is lying. But it changes. becomes something you carry instead of something that carries you, becomes part of your landscape instead of the entire terrain. In Peru, I met a woman named Elena. She was a guide on a hiking trip I'd signed up for. 52 years old, widowed 3 years earlier, fluent in 5 languages and comfortable in the kind of silence that comes from having lived through loss. We talked about grief over campfires in the Andes, about the people we'd lost and the lives we were building in their absence, about guilt and memory and the fear of moving forward while still looking back. I used to think finding happiness again meant betraying him, she said one night. Like I owed him eternal sorrow. Like being happy without him was a kind of infidelity. What changed? I asked. I realized he'd hate that. He spent our entire marriage trying to make me happy. Why would he want me to spend the rest of my life being miserable just to prove I'd loved him? It was a simple insight. Obvious, even. But it shifted something in me. Sarah would hate the last 6 months. Would hate that her death had been weaponized by her brothers. Would hate that I'd spent months in hotels and temporary housing, displaced and grieving. Would hate that her memory had become tangled with trauma and theft and federal investigations. But she'd love that I was traveling, that I was seeing the world, that I was carrying her with me to the places we dreamed about. She'd want me to be happy, not immediately, not artificially, but eventually. Honestly, she'd want me to build a new life that honored the old one without being imprisoned by it. So I started trying. A year after Sarah's death, I returned home. Not to the house we'd built, that belonged to the young family now, and I was genuinely happy for them. But to the city, to familiar streets and known landscapes, to the place where Sarah and I had spent 23 years building a life together. I'd kept in touch with Carol, regular phone calls, updates on her sons, stories about Sarah that I'd never heard before, glimpses of the woman I'd loved through her mother's eyes. Michael had completed his probation, was working for a nonprofit now, something about financial literacy for low-income families. Carol said he seemed different, quieter, more thoughtful, less sure of himself in ways that were actually improvements. David had left his old job, started his own small business doing home repair, something honest and straightforward. He'd told Carol it felt good to work with his hands, to build things instead of just taking them. John was still in prison, still had 8 months left, but Carol visited him weekly, and she said he was changing, reading, taking classes, talking about Sarah in ways he never had before, with actual understanding, actual respect. He asks about you, Carol said during one call. Does he? Wants to know if you're doing well, if you've found any peace. What do you tell him? The truth. That you're traveling, that you're healing, that Sarah would be proud of who you've become in the aftermath of losing her. Would she be proud? I thought about the man I'd been at her funeral. Numb, silent, allowing her brothers to speak over me, to treat me like an inconvenience, to assume my grief made me weak. I thought about the man who'd walked out of the house 5 days later with just a bag and a plan, who'd turned their attempted theft into a lesson in consequences. I thought about the man who was traveling the world now, carrying Sarah's memory without being crushed by it. Maybe, I said. I hope so. The investigation had officially closed. The brothers' restitution payments were being made according to court-ordered schedules. The house had been sold. Sarah's estate had been distributed. All the legal loose ends were tied up, documented, finalized. But some things couldn't be resolved legally. I think I need to see them, I told Carol during one of our calls. Your sons. All 3 of them. Not for their sake. For mine. Are you sure? No, I admitted. But I think Sarah would want me to. Would want me to at least try to find some kind of closure that isn't just legal documentation. John can't leave prison for another 8 months. Then I'll visit him there. And meet with Michael and David separately. If they're willing. They were. I met Michael first. He'd suggested a coffee shop. Not the same one where we'd met before. Both of us had too many bad memories of that. A different place. Neutral ground with better coffee and no ghosts. He looked older than I remembered. 53 now, but carrying it like 60. The expensive suits were gone. He wore jeans and a plain button-down shirt. Nothing designer, nothing flashy. Thomas, he said when I arrived. Thank you for agreeing to meet. We shook hands. Sat down. Ordered coffee neither of us really wanted. For a long moment, we just sat in silence. Then Michael said, I've rehearsed this conversation 100 times. Had exactly what I wanted to say, all planned out. But now that you're here, all of it seems inadequate. You don't have to. I started. I do, he interrupted. I need to say this. Not for you. Though I hope you'll listen, but for me. I need to acknowledge what I did. What we did. I nodded. Waited. I've spent my whole life being clever, Michael said. Being strategic. Finding angles and loopholes and ways to get what I wanted without directly breaking rules. I convinced myself that made me smart. Made me successful. But really it just made me an asshole. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. When Sarah died, I saw an opportunity. I hate that. Hate that my first response to my sister's death was calculation. How can we benefit? What can we gain? Who's weak enough to exploit? You thought I was weak enough? I said quietly. We all did. You were grieving. You'd just lost your wife. We thought. He stopped. Started again. We thought we could bully you into leaving before you realized you had the power to fight back. I wasn't weak, I said. I was grieving. There's a difference. I know that now. Do you? He looked at me then. Really looked at me. And what I saw in his eyes was something I hadn't expected. Shame. Real, genuine shame. I'm working for a nonprofit now, he said. Teaching financial literacy to people who've been exploited by people like me. People who manipulate and scheme and take advantage of others' vulnerability. Penance? I asked. Maybe. Or just trying to be someone Sarah wouldn't have been ashamed to call her brother. We talked for another hour. About Sarah. About family. About the difference between forgiveness and moving forward. About how change is uncomfortable and slow and requires sustained effort. I didn't forgive him, but I understood him. And maybe that was enough. David was different. He cried immediately. Before we even sat down, before I'd even said hello. I'm sorry, he sobbed. I'm so sorry, Thomas. I was weak and selfish, and I let John convince me that what we were doing was okay, was justified, was somehow what Sarah would have wanted. David, I said gently. Sit down. Breathe. He did. Barely. We were meeting at his small office, a storefront for his home repair business. The space smelled like sawdust and paint. Honest smells. Working smells. I think about it every day, David said once he'd collected himself slightly. About what we tried to do to you. About how we used Sarah's death as an excuse to steal from you. About how I told myself I was just going along with my brothers, like that made it okay. It doesn't, I said. I know it doesn't. I betrayed you. Betrayed Sarah's memory. Betrayed everything she tried to teach us about being decent human beings. She loved you anyway, I said. I don't know why. Because you're her brother. Because love doesn't require deservingness. Because she saw potential in you that you couldn't see in yourself. David wiped his eyes. Did she? See potential. She did. She told me once, years ago, that you were the kindest of the three brothers. That you had a good heart, but weak boundaries. That you let others push you into things you knew were wrong. She was right, David whispered. So prove it, I said. Be the person she thought you could be. Not for me. Not for anyone else. For yourself. I'm trying, he said. This business, it's small. It's not impressive. But it's honest. Everything I do here is honest. I fix things that are broken. I charge fair prices. I help people. It's not much, but it's enough, I said. It's exactly enough. Visiting John in prison was harder. The facility was minimum security, more like a college campus than a traditional prison. But there were still guards. Still barriers. Still the institutional smell of controlled lives and limited freedom. John looked terrible. Prison gray didn't suit him. Neither did humility. He sat across from me in the visiting area, separated by a table bolted to the floor, and he looked like a man who'd been hollowed out and was slowly being filled with something new. You came, he said. I came. I didn't think you would. I wouldn't have, in your position. I'm not you, I said simply. He flinched. No, you're not. You're a better man than I ever was. Than I ever gave you credit for being. Silence stretched between us. Heavy, loaded with a year's worth of consequences. I wrote you a letter, John said finally. Months ago. Did you get it? I did. Did you read it? Yes. Did it mean anything? I considered the question. The letter had been raw, honest, probably the most vulnerable John had ever been in written form. It meant you were starting to understand, I said. Not that you'd arrived at understanding, but that you were starting the journey. John nodded slowly. I have 8 months left here. 8 months to figure out who I am when I'm not failing upward. When I can't blame others for my mistakes. When I have to actually face what I've done. What have you learned so far? That I'm terrified, he admitted. Terrified of leaving here, and going right back to who I was. Terrified I'll forget these lessons the moment things get comfortable again. That's probably healthy, I said. Is it? Fear of backsliding means you understand what you're fighting against. It's the people who think they're cured who usually relapse. He absorbed that. Then, would you be willing to talk to me again? After I get out? Not for my sake. I have no right to ask for your time. But Sarah, she loved you so much, Thomas. You were the best thing that ever happened to her. And I think if I can talk to you occasionally, I might remember what it means to be the kind of man she believed we could be. I thought about it. Thought about holding grudges and burning bridges and letting the past stay in the past. Thought about Sarah, who'd loved her broken family despite all the reasons not to. Call me when you get out, I said. We'll see. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was possibility. And sometimes that's enough. 1 year, 365 days since Sarah died. I spent the anniversary at the cemetery. Not because I believed she was there. Sarah hadn't been religious, hadn't believed in souls lingering near bodies, but because it felt right. Because I needed somewhere physical to take my grief. Her headstone was simple, just her name, her dates, and a line from a poem she'd loved. I was here. I mattered. I brought flowers. Sat on the grass beside her grave. Talked to her like she could hear. You'd laugh if you could see what happened this year, I said. Your brothers tried to steal from me. Can you believe that? Well, of course you can. You always knew exactly who they were. A breeze moved through the trees. The kind Sarah would have painted. I handled it, I continued. Not the way they expected. Not the way I expected, honestly. But it worked out. They're facing consequences. Learning lessons. Maybe becoming the men you always believed they could be. I plucked grass. Let it fall. I miss you, I said. And my voice cracked because it was true. Would always be true. Every day, every moment. There's this space in my life where you used to be, and nothing fills it. Nothing ever will. But that was okay. Because that space wasn't meant to be filled. It was meant to be honored. Remembered. Carried forward as proof that Sarah had existed, had mattered, had changed me in ways that would last long after she was gone. I'm selling the house, I said. Already did, actually. It felt like the right thing to do. Too many memories. Too much weight. But I'm keeping your paintings. Your journals. The things that show who you were. Another breeze. And I'm traveling. Seeing all those places we talked about. It's not the same without you. But I think you'd want me to go anyway. To live the life we planned. Even though you're not here to live it with me. I stood up. Brushed grass from my pants. I'm going to be okay, I told her. Eventually. Not today. Maybe not this year. But eventually. Because you taught me how to be strong. How to stand up for what's right. How to love people without being destroyed by them. I touched the headstone. Thank you, I whispered. For 23 years. For showing me what partnership looks like. For being the best thing that ever happened to me. I walked back to my car. Behind me, Sarah's grave sat peaceful in the November sunlight. Ahead of me, the rest of my life waited. 3 years after Sarah's death, I stood in the doorway of a small art gallery in Seattle. The space was intimate. Maybe 20 pieces on the walls, each one carefully lit and labeled. A sign by the entrance read, Sarah Mitchell, a retrospective. Works from the collection of Thomas Mitchell and the Morrison Family Trust. Carol stood beside me, looking at her daughter's paintings with tears streaming down her face. She was so talented, Carol whispered. She was. I can't believe you did this. I'd spent 2 years putting the exhibition together, working with curators, selecting pieces, writing descriptions, coordinating loans from the paintings I'd kept and the ones I'd donated to the trust Sarah had established for future artists. Sarah deserved to be seen, I said. Really seen. Not just by family and friends, but by people who could appreciate the depth of her work. Michael and David stood nearby, looking at a painting Sarah had done of the 3 brothers as children. In it, they were playing in a backyard, all innocence and potential. I don't remember her painting this, Michael said quietly. She did it about 5 years ago, I said. From an old photograph. She said she wanted to remember who you used to be before life complicated things. David wiped his eyes. Do you think she'd forgive us? For what we did? She already had, I said. Sarah forgave you for everything years before she died. That was who she was. The question isn't whether she'd forgive you. It's whether you've forgiven yourselves. John was the last to arrive. He'd been released from prison 18 months earlier. Had spent the time since working 2 jobs, repaying restitution, rebuilding his life from the ground up. He looked different, thinner, grayer, but somehow more solid, like he'd traded bluster for substance. "Thomas," he said when he saw me. This is incredible." "It's Sarah," I said simply. "She was always incredible. The world just didn't know it yet." We walked through the gallery together, all of us. Carol, the three brothers, and me. Looking at paintings that told the story of a woman who died too soon, but had left behind proof of her vision, her talent, her way of seeing beauty in ordinary things. "I'm getting married," I said at one point. The announcement fell into silence. Carol turned to me, eyes wide. "Thomas, that's wonderful. Who?" "Her name is Elena," I said. "She's a tour guide. Lives in Peru. We met 3 years ago while I was traveling. She's a widow too. We understand each other." "Does she know about Sarah?" Michael asked. "She knows everything about Sarah. She knows Sarah will always be part of my life, part of who I am. And she doesn't see that as competition. She sees it as proof that I know how to love deeply." "Sarah would like her," Carol said with certainty. "I think so too." We stood together in front of Sarah's favorite painting, the one of the oak trees at sunrise, painted from our bedroom window in the house I'd built. The house we'd shared. The house where I'd said goodbye to her the morning she died. "What do you think happens now?" David asked. "After this exhibition?" "After," I smiled. "Sarah's work gets seen, gets appreciated, maybe gets purchased by collectors who'll preserve it. The trust uses the money to fund other artists. Her legacy continues. And us?" John asked quietly. "What happens to us?" I looked at him, at all three brothers, at the men who tried to steal from me and had instead learned what it cost to be thieves, at the family that had broken and was slowly, painfully reassembling into something different, something maybe better. "We move forward," I said. "We honor Sarah by being the people she believed we could be. We carry her memory without being crushed by it. We build lives that would make her proud." "Can we do that?" John asked. "After everything?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But we can try. For Sarah. For ourselves. For the family we could have been all along." Carol put her arm around my shoulders. "She loved you so much, Thomas. Thank you for loving her back. For giving her 23 years of happiness. For protecting her legacy. She gave me more than I gave her." I said. "No," Carol said firmly. "You gave each other exactly what you needed. That's what love is." We stayed at the gallery until closing, looking at paintings, sharing memories, being the family Sarah had always wanted us to be, imperfect, damaged, but trying to be better, trying to honor her, trying to live lives worthy of the love she'd given us. Outside, the Seattle rain was falling. Sarah would have painted it, the way light caught in water, the way the world looked softened by moisture, the beauty in gray days. Inside, her work hung on walls for strangers to see and appreciate. And somewhere, in memory, in the paintings, in the lives of the people who'd loved her, Sarah Mitchell was still alive, still teaching us, still believing we could be better, still loving us despite all the reasons not to. I stepped out into the rain. Elena was waiting. My future wife. My new chapter. My proof that grief doesn't end love, but makes room for new forms of it. Behind me, Sarah's paintings glowed in gallery light. Ahead of me, a life I hadn't planned but was learning to embrace. And between the two, between past and future, between grief and hope, I stood. Not paralyzed, not stuck, just breathing, living, moving forward while carrying backward, the way we all do, the way we all must, the way Sarah, in her wisdom and love, had always known we would.